Hello and welcome to Unco, a podcast about what's unusual in tech. I'm your host, Timothy Buck. This week's guest was Eric Young. He works in strategy and analytics at NBCUniversal. Eric's understanding of Hollywood and the media landscape, along with his strongly held views about Apple, made for a great conversation about Apple's media strategy across music, video, news, podcasts, and more. Help Unco stay around by becoming a patron over at patreon.com/uncofm. Hi, Eric. How's it going?
Good. How are you today?
I'm doing well. We're just going to jump right in because I actually have to be somewhere in like an hour. So can you just go ahead and give my listeners an idea of who you are and what you do?
Well, I'm currently at NBCUniversal, and I'm in charge of analyzing all of our content and looking at the strategy and trying to develop how we can better target our audience. So essentially what that means is I'm in charge of analyzing all of our content and how it performs across every single customer touch point that we touch, that we're there, except the TV. So if you watch TV on your phone, if you watch TV through social media or any kind of platform, I'm in charge of analyzing that. So if it's like on Snapchat or even on the new Twitter that we have a new deal with.
Yeah, that's really cool. And so that's why I have you on the show, because I think we can have some really interesting conversations. I think we actually initially met on Twitter.
I think that's right. I can't remember though.
But yeah, I'm pretty sure we met on Twitter, and then we moved into that Slack group. That was like me and you and Ben Baharin and Zach Saichi and however many of us were in that group. And then I think that's kind of when we got to know each other a little bit better.
Right. And I think I flew up there a couple times too, and I met you in person.
Yeah, you came up to San Francisco, and like we went to Ghirardelli and got chocolate ice cream and stuff. Yeah.
The best thing. Yeah, I still remember that.
It is really good. It's kind of in it's kind of in a touristy part of town, but I still go there because it's just really good chocolate.
And I'm a chocolate fan, so I still remember what I got. It was fantastic.
Yeah, me too. If anybody listening ever goes there, the Nob Hill Chill is really, really good, and I get that every time.
Oh my gosh, yes. I wish I had one in Los Angeles, but I don't know if there's one nearby. So
I don't know. It's actually not that far from my house, so it works out really well. We go there way too often.
Lucky.
Yeah. Well, we do kind of need to jump in here. So what I brought you on the show to talk about primarily was Apple's media strategy. And because you do have expertise in media strategy for NBC, I thought it could be interesting to talk through some of the things that we know about what Apple is doing across, all the different media that they either produce or that they have some sort of outlet. Like, obviously, they have the podcast app that many of you guys are listening to right now. They have Apple Music that competes with Spotify and so many other other competitors there, and all the deals that are coming out with them, like making movies and TV shows. And there's just a lot going on with Apple and media. And I think it could be interesting to talk with somebody who knows a lot more than I do about it. So what are your initial thoughts, just maybe high level? How do you feel about Apple and their media strategy right now?
Well, the way I look at it right now is I think they have basically a four-pronged strategy. And it's basically, if anyone's familiar with Apple before, they had something called iLife on the Mac. And that was their entire strategy to sell the Mac before, right? They had four key components, and that's what really focused on. So for this content strategy, they go in the same kind of direction, if you will, but instead of around content creation, it's mostly going to be around content consumption. So the first leg, what they're going to focus on is Apple Music. As we all know, they bought Beats. Number two would be Apple News, which is actually performing fantastically. They had their best performing, record performing ever last month. Next would be Apple, the video service they're going to offer, and lastly, it's going to be the Apple Podcast app. So I think all four leg of the content strategy will really go hand in hand together, just to drive engagement and to keep you inside the Apple ecosystem.
And I think that's interesting that you bring podcasts into that. And even as somebody who makes a couple podcasts, when I initially was thinking about this, I kind of left that off Do you see that as something
Right.
that is just as important as the others, or at least it deserves being one of the main four?
I mean, it's not going to be as important as all the other ones, but it is still important enough to be included in the all four. So they are the number one distributor of podcasts itself, their directory. I think, and mostly what we're going to talk about is all speculation based on what I know, based on my history here in Hollywood, and based on what I've heard. So I think I have a pretty good idea of how they're going to address each strategy, each four of the prongs. So regarding podcast itself, I mean, there isn't really that much money to be made because most of the money being made on podcasts is around advertising, and Apple is simply not in that game. However, I do see the possibility of them offering paid subscription podcasts or premium service, and that backend will be running off the Apple News platform probably.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's interesting. Well, do you want to, I guess, maybe dive in with the very first one that you mentioned, the Apple Music and Beats? How do you see them approaching? I mean, based on it seems to be doing pretty well. Just the other day, I think you were the one who messaged it to me that they some analysts said that they passed Spotify in subscribers in the U.S. and just a few years ago that would have people would have laughed at that just because of how late to the game they came in. But they seem to be doing really well with Apple Music. What are your thoughts?
Right, absolutely. So I want to kind of like dispel a couple of preconceived notion that Apple doesn't compete against Spotify. They don't care about Spotify at all. That's not their main competitor, and that's not where they're aiming towards to get subscribers from at all. Like it doesn't factor in their strategy what Spotify does and how they suggest their product. So I do want to say that firsthand. Apple Music's competitor is iTunes. That's where they're getting their subscribers from. And before that, they had about 500 million customers on iTunes across the world who bought individual tracks. That's who they're targeting at. So Spotify, their main competitor is not Apple Music, and Apple Music's competitor is not Spotify. So I just want to kind of,
Oh, that's
clear that up.
interesting. So you're saying like Spotify is getting most of their customers were never iTunes users, and most of Apple Music's new customers are coming from previous iTunes users who bought their own, you know, all the music that they had off of iTunes.
I mean, because Apple Music was never there in the first place, so there were a lot of customers that bought through iTunes, a couple years ago, and there was no other option except Spotify. Yes, they got customers from iTunes, but that's no longer the case. I mean, that ended a long time ago. Um, what really happened was their main competitor and their main lead generation is from the free service, and the free service who they really compete against is YouTube.
Oh yeah, that makes sense because
Yeah.
yeah, I had a coworker who, when I worked at HP, and all he did to listen to music all day was, when he was a developer and he just had YouTube on, like he had it
Yeah,
closed in the
exactly. And if you
background.
go to any dorm, if you go to any dorm, or if you have any kids, you know firsthand that they what they listen to music is YouTube. They don't listen to anything else. YouTube is the number one platform by far. That is a gorilla in the room. So that's one of the big reasons why, as a product, I really do like Spotify. But as a company, I think they have really poor management. I don't have any confidence in them. I
Yeah,
don't think they understand who their main competitor is. They keep thinking it's Apple, and it's not. And because of that, I think they're going to get slaughtered, if you will, or get really, really compressed. I think they could be the next, what is it, Snapchat, without even realizing it. It's really unfortunate that they still don't understand their main competitor.
yeah,
That's not a good thing.
yeah, and the longer that they've been around and they've continued to grow pretty significantly. But I and many of the people I've been talking to about this just don't see how they're going to take those subscribers and turn it into serious profits.
Well, I mean, they have no strategy whatsoever. And let's be clear that yes, they are converting a lot of customers right now. But let's be clear that when they do convert customers to the paid subscription, it's in a very, very low ARPU. I mean, they are offering massive discounts because they have no pricing power. When it comes down to it, if you really think about Spotify itself, they have zero pricing power. That's why they can't make any money. It's not because of the record labels. Yeah, I mean, the record labels, they don't have the best deal. They don't have the best strategy itself. The best contract terms and so on. but at the same time, they're not really trying to address costs or anything like that. And moreover, they're not really trying to fix the product around where they can actually focus their subscription service to make more money. They're not even trying that because they think that their main competitor is Apple when it's not. And that's really dangerous. So it's really unfortunate. Now, for Apple though, their main competitor, of course, is iTunes, and that's where they're converting their users from. And so, what I think Apple's going to do in the future would be, just because everyone knows that that is correct, that music streaming doesn't make any money. But what I see Apple going forward is really focusing and double down on Beats itself and keeping Beats independent, of course. But they're really going to focus on the lifestyle and different kind of like moods and genres. And I see them going into like a lot of content marketing, a lot of brand merchandising, and offering a lot of hardware accessories. So, I mean, people mentioned the HomePod itself. That's the Apple brand. But I also see them really focusing and double down more on this speaker side from Beats. And Beats will be different, where Apple will be focusing on more of the like the techie side. It's going to be known for computer system. It's going to have like Siri and so on. The Beats side would be focused more on the lifestyle and branding aspect, right? Like what kind of music do you like? Do you like hip hop? Do you like running? Do you like fashion? That's where they're going to really focus. That's where they're going to be focused on. So I see Apple offering or Beats offering, wristbands for the Apple Watch, cases for the iPhone, and like armbands and so on, or even sunglasses. So that's what I really focus on around the lifestyle aspect, and really all about branding and different kind of moods and different kind of genres of music itself. That's where Apple's going to be focused on, and I'm actually really bullish on their strategy itself because they really know how to focus on different related business areas where they can have a lot of potential to make the actual endeavor profitable because the actual music streaming service itself is very unprofitable.
Is it unprofitable for Apple as well? Just like, are they losing money on
Oh,
Apple?
they're losing more money than Spotify by far. They have a worse contract term with the record labels, so they pay per stream a lot more. Not a lot more, but they pay per stream more than Spotify. Spotify actually has a pretty decent deal, if you will. But Apple's cognizant about that. But what I really see them doing is branching off, going into other related areas like content marketing, video, and so on for Apple Music itself. So if you think about what they're going to do with like carpool karaoke, and if you notice how they did an exclusive for Taylor Swift around her concert, they're going to do a lot more of that. And if anyone remembers watching MTV back in the day, they had like an MTV show called Diary, and they showed you behind the scenes of a certain artist. Apple's going to do the same thing, and think like 30 for 30 on ESPN, but for music. That's what they're really going to focus on, or like True Hollywood Story from which is the NBC brand. They're going to really focus and double down on that for
And
that video concept, but for Apple Music only.
oh, so you see that not being in their like in their videos
No,
streaming service, but instead
no,
being a part of Apple
they have
Music.
that is correct. They have two video plays. One is for Apple Music, which is like content marketing bonus, behind the scenes clips and so on, just to create added value. And then the separate side, which is the video, the original content side that everyone's really focused on, that's separate.
Oh, that makes sense. And then I'm assuming like one nice thing about the TV app is that it could bring in both of those, right? So you could, from the TV app on your Apple TV or your phone or whatever, you could, if you have an Apple Music subscription, you can watch that content there, or you could watch the Apple Videos subscription there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I see Apple doing in the future as well regarding Apple Music itself, when they do offer their own like Prime subscription, I see them branching off Apple Music into a separate subscription where this subscription will be bundled with their main like Apple Prime, if you will, subscription. Let's call Apple Essential subscription, where it includes the iPhone, includes iCloud, the Apple Video service, and a portion of the Apple Music. So I see Apple Music offering like Apple Music Essentials, if you will, part of that main bundle itself. And this is where it's gonna differentiate from the main service where you have to pay a little bit more. I see them offering maybe like not the entire library of content, but maybe the top artists, if you will, and maybe the most recent content. So that's what they're really going to focus on and double down on to make their service a little bit more profitable. And by the way, that's what Spotify should be doing, but they're not.
Yeah, that's interesting. So how quickly would you expect them to have an Apple Essentials type? I know that's a type bundle. Like I've heard rumors about that for years, especially with like the Apple Upgrade program and things like that. That kind of could be the initial steps of that. Um, how
Yeah,
quickly do you see them doing that?
I see them doing it in the next few years. But the reason why I mentioned that they have to split Apple Music itself and offer maybe like a starter tier, if you will, is because this video service that they're going to offer, this main subscription, I mean, that's going to cost a lot of money, of course, as well. And to add on Apple Music, the complete service itself is Apple Music itself is already so unprofitable. The idea to bundle that further into the subscription service wouldn't be the most economical, wouldn't make the most economical sense. So that's why I see them splitting up and segmenting the Apple Music library itself, and therefore gaining more leverage with the recording with the music labels. Because the music labels itself, I heard from in the past when Apple Music was, or when they acquired Beats and they were negotiating for contracts to get the to license their music. From what I understand, Apple did pursue that route where they wanted to segment the music library to give them a little more leverage itself and to obviously lower their cost, right? But the music industry was adamant, the music labels were adamant. No, you have to subscribe to the entire library for this set price, and what that means is you're just going to be unprofitable, right?
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. So moving on to the next tier, I guess. We've talked about Apple Music and Beats for a little bit here, and the next one, which we kind of already touched on a little bit, was Apple Video, and I think that's a name that you've been using. It's kind of hard to talk about it because they already have an Apple TV, and I guess we can just call it. Yeah, we can just call it the Apple Video strategy. I know there's been a lot of rumors. There's been a lot of even just announcements from Apple about new series or new movies or whatever that they have purchased in recent months. How quickly do you see that coming out, and what do you see their strategy being there with Apple Video?
Well, I mean, it's been reported that it's going to be released sometime in 2019, and that reporting I would argue is pretty accurate from what we heard as well. They're really doubling down on that. They finally have a great leadership team. They finally have a strategy go around their original content strategy before. Whereas if you go back maybe a year and a half ago, they really didn't. And I was not as bullish on them before because it just seemed like they weren't really serious, and it just seemed like they were running around Hollywood with their head cut off, if you will. Now they really understand what they're going to be doing, and to really double down on that, and I think they have the right strategy. So for Apple Video, this comes down to what their main bundle is going to be, so and what they're going to be targeting. So um, I argue Apple is a platform company, and that's what they understand. And because of that, their video service is going to be like Amazon Prime. That's their main competitor. It's not going to be Netflix. It's not going to be HBO. They're not aiming at HBO, nor should they. If they did try to go after HBO, I would argue that they would lose. What they really should focus on, and what they are doing, from what I understand, is really focusing on developing the bundle of the bundle, if you will. So they want to be the lowest common denominator when it comes down to any kind of content service that you buy, and you buy everything on top of them. So if you think about it, that is Amazon channels, and that is exactly what Apple is going to be doing.
So,
So
so just in case anybody here doesn't know what Amazon channels are, basically through Apple's video service, you could also subscribe to HBO, Stars, whatever it may be, and kind of like pile those on top to create a bundle of Apple's original content, and then those other companies' content. Is that what you're saying?
exactly, because when it comes down to it, Apple's spending what $2 billion on content itself. They can never beat Netflix, right? Netflix is spending what $8 to $10 billion on content this year alone.
Yeah.
So the idea is they can't overwhelm Netflix, and nor should they. I would argue Netflix is an app on the iPhone, and I've always had this argument why when people always said Apple should go out and kill or buy Netflix, I never understood that proposition personally myself. It's like they have an app store. They have all these developers and third-party companies developing and building their business on top of the app store. Why would Apple want to kill it? Like, I never understood that argument. So what they're going to do is instead build like the App Store model, if you will. They're going to be the lowest platform, the lowest common denominator, and they're going to use their content they're going to produce itself as customer acquisition cost, right? They're in other words, it's marketing. They want people to go into their app, their new video app that they're going to be launching, right? And they want people to use it. Once they have engagement and once they have a lot of usage and audience from there, then they can attract more developers or content companies like Netflix and all the content studios itself, and to integrate and to plug in to Apple's video service itself, where you can buy on top of it. So it's going to be like an additional like in-app purchase, if you will. And if you really like it, if you really like HBO, say that you're in the Apple Video app and you really like HBO, you can subscribe to HBO right from the app itself, or say that you have this video service that from Apple, their main underlying subscription service, and you really like Apple Music itself, because right now it includes Apple Music Lite. If you really like it, you can upgrade to the Apple Music Complete library, if you will. The same idea, if you will.
Yeah, and how do you see that as different from like right now in the TV app? You have kind of if you have an HBO subscription and the app installed, then it shows up there. If you have Showtime, it shows up there. If you have TV with a regular TV bundle with like CBS or NBC or whatever it may be, that shows up there. How is this concept different than that?
So what they're doing right now is kind of like a launcher, if you will. So when you go to the TV app right now and you find something, you tap on it, it opens up, it kicks you out, it opens up into another app. It's a pretty poor experience, and it's not going to go anywhere, right? The idea is all those content apps that you mentioned, like CBS, NBC, and so on, that's called TV Everywhere. So you have to have a subscription to your cable bundle already to watch that content. So it doesn't really work for subscription on demand like SVOD. They don't offer that. The only thing they offer right now through SVOD is, you're correct, HBO Now, Showtime, and Amazon Prime. They don't have Netflix in there.
Yeah,
So
I think
what
they
this
may
new
have
system
Stars and like a few other small ones as well, but
exactly, but no one does that, right? What people do is when they do want to subscribe to a bundle, or if they want to go SVOD only, I think their main competitor, the number one distributor right now, is Amazon Prime, the channel system, Amazon Channels. So you use Amazon Channels. It's exactly like the TV app, if you will, and you really like something, you just subscribe within. And it doesn't kick you out into a different app. You stay within its system. So the way I look at it right now, or what their new system will be, is if anyone is aware of Apple News, I would argue that's the future of TV.
so expound on that.
So Apple News right now is a very great platform itself for distributing content. They have a feed itself, and all of the content partners, they plug into Apple News, right? It's a platform, and they go through their API or they go through RSS. Apple's going to be discontinuing RSS, and they're really focused on the API, as they should be. And what happens is all of the content companies, we are a partner as well, and most publishers around the world, and most reputable publishers are already in Apple News right now. So they deliver their content through an API, and it gets bundled into the Apple News app. And you can scroll through your feed. It has an algorithm, and it shows you related content that you should be interested in, that you may be interested in. When you tap on it, it doesn't kick you out of an app. It stays within the Apple News app itself, and it offers the best kind of experience where Apple controls the entire experience from back end to the front end itself. And what happens is each individual publisher, you can go to their own branded channel itself, and you can see all their content just for that one individual publisher. So that's basically the same way it's going to work for Apple Video. So when you subscribe, or when a content company like CBS works with Apple Video, what's going to happen is they're going to feed their content through an API, and in this feed or in this video app, it's going to look like Apple News itself. You can actually go into and tap on and look at only all the content only for CBS itself. And by the way, on Apple News, every single publisher, their main feed is called a channel. So everyone becomes a quote end quote channel, if you will. And that works fantastically for video, I would argue. And you don't have to download a separate app. It's built in. You don't have to, when you want to subscribe to, like the New York Times, you don't have to download the New York Times app. It's built right in. And that's the same idea how Apple Video is going to work as well. So when you want to subscribe to HBO, when you want to look at another, um, what is it, ABC content, if you will, if you do want to subscribe to them, when they offer their own SVOD option, when if you do want to subscribe to ESPN Plus, you don't have to download a separate app. It's built right into the feed itself. And what happens is it serves as content marketing. It serves as an excellent lead generator. So just like Apple News, if you it can recommend you an article from like the Washington Post and you tap on it, but it's behind a paywall, and you can click right there at the bottom and you subscribe to it. That's the same idea. That's the same way it's going to work for the Apple Video app itself.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I'm hypothetically in the Apple Video app, and I'm looking at a bunch of content that I already have access to, but the algorithm may say, "Hey, this is something else you'd be interested in," and it may be a Showtime show or something. And when I click on it, then it's going to say, "Hey, do you want a Showtime subscription?"
Exactly. So the way I look at it, if you look at a spectrum, you can have individual apps itself. That's what we currently have right now. So you have to download a separate app for HBO. You have to download a separate app for CBS. The opposite of the spectrum is Netflix, where Netflix is a big aggregator. They just buy the shows, and it's all bundled in itself. And Netflix itself is a complete TV ecosystem. That is the opposite end of the spectrum. Unfortunately, though, uh, content studios don't like that because there isn't any branding control, right? You can't look at all content made by, ABC Studios or all content made by
Right.
CBS. There isn't a channel system for that. This new system, Apple News, is a middle ground. Publishers love it, and I would argue Hollywood, the studios, would love that as well. And what they're going to do is they're going to use their content, their original content that they're producing themselves. They're spending about $2 billion a year, as I mentioned before, and they're going to use that as more of like a lead generator to get people to use your app first. It's customer acquisition cost, right? It's marketing. They're
Right.
going to use that content itself to open it up. When you open up the app, you can at least watch Apple's content itself if you really like it, and then you can start getting recommended of premium add-ons as well from HBO, from Showtime, and so on.
Hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting. Do you see it being opened up the way that Apple News is to smaller time publishers as well, or?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, 100%. They are a platform company at heart. Absolutely, 100%.
Oh, that's really interesting. So in that way, I mean, it's not really a. I mean, in that way, it is similar to like a YouTube thing where any person could create a channel theoretically.
No, they're not going to go that direction. They're not going to be. It's not user generated. So let me make that clear. You can do a partnership, of course, for like if you're like a Logan Paul, if you will, possibly for sure. You can make your own system. You can plug into the API. Yes, they're gonna have video. They're gonna have vetting, of course, as well. But it's not going to be like anyone can upload their video by itself.
Okay.
It's not
Yeah, yeah.
easy.
So the reason I was asking is because, like, for Apple News, my sites
Right.
are like connected to Apple News, and so they show up there, even though I am a small fish in, right?
Yeah,
So
but mind you, when you did that, Apple did approve you. It's exactly like the App Store. Think apps. Don't think YouTube. Think App Store. You have to go through approval process, and once you're granted, you're in. Same idea. That's how Apple News works right now. So Apple News really focusing and doubles down on they don't want to be a platform like Facebook where there's a lot of misinformation, there's a lot of propaganda, there's a lot of fake news. They're not going down that direction because at the end of the day, Apple's still a branding company. They care about their brands, and anything bad like that associated with them really hurts their brand. So that's basically the same idea of what they're going to do and what they're going to apply for the Apple Video service itself. There's going to be a vetting procedure as well, and they're going to make sure that there isn't any kind of like pornography on the platform. If they do, you're going to ban it. They're going to ban you. Simple as that.
yeah, yeah. I actually initially I wasn't seeing the distinction, but now that you describe it again, I think I do. Um,
Yeah, like I said before, I think I mentioned this maybe 2 years ago with you. Apple News is the future of Apple's content platforms by far. It is literally the future of everything. Um, you don't have to call it Apple News, but the back end, call it whatever you want. It doesn't matter. But that system itself is the future.
And so you see that as obviously for video, you see it for news, which we can get into in a second. Do you see that as being something similar for podcasts?
Yes. So podcast itself, I would argue, if they do want to offer premium, offer subscription podcasts, if you will, right now there isn't a way to do that. It's not protected. It's just through RSS. Apple News has their own API. It would work great for that, right? So the
Oh,
back end of
interesting.
Apple Podcasts will be Apple News. And second of all, I would argue, would it be really neat if you could have built-in, notes for the podcast app, right? You can have podcast notes. You can tap on something, and instead of opening into the mobile web, it'll open instantaneously Apple News articles, right? Or even like stories formats, or even like auto advancing uh, slideshows, if you will. That could work very well, and that's what I see Apple doing. And for them to do that, they would need to use the Apple News platform, which I would argue they should.
Yeah, and the transition there would be very similar to the way Apple News has transitioned, where it started with RSS only, which is what podcast is right now,
Yeah,
and then they could do the transition where if you're still RSS, you still show up there, but you don't have quite as much control over how things look and feel. And then as they add more features, they'll theoretically get more and more people to begin using the Apple podcast format API.
yeah. So that's a great description of it. When it comes down to it, this is how they're going to treat everything. RSS is an open standard. It's really old, and it's not really the best format. It's pretty shitty, if you will. It doesn't have the best experience. I understand like techies love it. Great. But that's the basically open platform, the most minimal system that's available through Apple News. But if you really care about experience, and Apple does, they offer the premium version of Apple News, and that's through the API using their format. It doesn't cost money. It's free, but it's proprietary, yes, but Apple controls the experience. And anyone that uses and anyone that knows Apple News, when publishers switch to the API, to the Apple News format, those articles, they're instantaneous. They open in a second. They're super fast. Apple News is by far the fastest and the best news reading experience on the mobile phone right now. It's fantastic. And to get that kind of experience, you have to use their format.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and they make it pretty simple to do that too. So that's
Oh, absolutely.
yeah. I mean, I use Squarespace for my sites, and it's all just I
Yeah,
literally
they have
had
a
to check a box, and then it started working.
yeah, they have a partnership with Apple, just like WordPress does. And if you publish to WordPress, to the VIP, or I think Pro version of WordPress, it can automatically publish to Apple News using the format. It's a really great system.
Yep. Yeah, that's really cool. So I guess we've covered music, we've covered video, and we've begun to cover news. Was there anything else in news that you wanted to talk about? Um,
Well, we don't really focus too much on video itself. To double down a little bit more, to go a little more further around the video itself.
okay,
The
good.
you know Yeah, I mean, yes, Apple Video, the content itself is going to be used as customer acquisition costs. But I would argue on top of that, it's also maybe like a reference design system for Apple as well. So if they do want to push VR or AR itself, I would argue what better way to demonstrate that is through their own video, right? They can make content exclusively just for AR experience and so on, because they have that background now of actually producing content. So that would be an excellent way for Apple to do it. Number two, I would argue also that this service that Apple's going to be focused on, just like Apple Music itself, their main target audience will not be the United States. It's going to be the entire world. So if you ask what kind of content Apple's going to make, they're not going to be making HBO style content. They're not going to be making content for the niche and explicit content, if you will. That's not their model. They can't go in that direction. If you want to know what kind of content Apple's going to make, it's going to be the broad spectrum. It's going to be broadcast, right? Anyone can watch it, and anyone can watch it on their device because they have 1 billion users, and they sell their devices in every single content, in every single market, in every single country. And most countries, they don't have the same style or same understanding of freedom of speech as the United States does. So if you make content and you sell it, or if you distribute it to the United Kingdom, or if you distribute to Russia or Canada, we know firsthand that they have a lot of content restrictions. I mean, it's not censorship. You can argue it's censorship, yes, but they call it content standards, and that's the same idea. Apple has to make this content and has to be appropriate for every single market. So think of broadcast quality content. That's what they're going to be offering. And in reality, it makes sense if they are a lead generator, right? If they're making this content to be a lead generator to get you to subscribe to the add-ons like HBO.
Yeah, then you want it to be as broad as possible because it's yeah, that makes complete sense. That makes complete
Yeah,
sense.
absolutely. And it makes sense it's going to be distributed through the app itself. It's not going to be exclusive to the Apple TV itself, the actual hardware box. And I would argue the future of the Apple TV hardware box is over, right? I mean, yeah, I don't really see a big future, a bright future for the Apple TV box itself. I don't think Steve Jobs did either. Um, at the end of the day, when it comes down to third-party boxes, cable companies will own that forever, and it's going to die, and it's going to die with them. And no one's going to come in there and it's going to take it away from them, nor should they. Apple has the iPhone. You don't need to. I would argue if you want to know the future of the Apple TV hardware box itself, use CarPlay. That's the future. What's going to happen is they're not going to be able to make an app and make every single TV company or TV hardware manufacturer to have an Apple video app itself. I would argue they don't need to do that, right? They can just work with the underlying chip companies that provide for every single TV company. And just like they did with CarPlay, and just say, listen, allow us to take over the screen, right? From to beam it from your iPhone, and I'll take over your TV. That's the future.
Hmm. That's interesting.
It's CarPlay, right? And that they will control. It's the exact same thing as an Apple TV, right? With a hardware box, and it can go on any single TV. Most TVs sold nowadays have Wi-Fi, so it'll work.
So would it require any hardware changes to a typical 5-year-old TV that can connect to Wi-Fi?
I mean, naturally, it won't be able to work with 5-year-old TVs or old TVs. They're gonna have to work with manufacturers itself to allow that kind of open standard. But this is not new. This is not hard. They work with all the component manufacturers of cars right now. So I think most cars sold, like 70% of all cars sold, has at least an option to have CarPlay, right? And Apple doesn't go into each manufacturer and design a system just for that individual car manufacturer. No, it's just an open standard. What happens is it's just connects to one of their, I don't know how it works. I'm not an engineer, but it just takes over the screen. It's like a video input on your TV.
Huh. That's interesting.
Right. That's the future of Apple TV, and I would argue that's the future of all systems. I don't see hardware streaming boxes going that far. By the way, neither does Roku. Roku is now working with the TV manufacturers itself to get their OS built in, right? Because they know that the hardware pucks itself, I mean, it's not going to win. It's too hard. Those boxes itself is owned by the cable companies or satellite companies, and they will always be.
Yeah. Hmm. I don't know enough about that to really even have an intelligent conversation, but I think it's an interesting concept.
Well, I
Um,
mean, a lot of people ask, like, why can't the Apple TV display broadcast channels itself? Why can't you just plug it in? And if anyone remembers cable card, that's basically why, right? The FCC changed, I think, in 2012. They allowed even broadcast channels to be encrypted. So if you have cable TV right now, before you could watch basic cable, like the broadcast channels at least, without using a cable box. Well, that's changed now. So every single cable company can charge you per TV, per box, because now they're encrypted. And that's basically the same idea why it'll never work for a third-party box like an Apple TV or a Roku. It'll never work. And Steve Jobs knew it. And that's why I've always said that the Apple TV itself is more like a bridge to the future. It's not the future. It is just a bridge to get people to understand that you can watch TV separate from the cable systems and into the digital and delivered over the internet, right? But once you make it to that side, you can throw away the Apple TV box because it's not going anywhere.
hmm.
Sorry if I burst people's bubbles, but
No,
it's
no, I don't have any particular love for the Apple TV. I mean, I have one and it's fine, but I feel like for my wife and I probably watch more TV on our
smart
iPad.
TV. Oh, that too. I mean, if you want to look at the TV itself, do you watch most of the apps to the TV, to the smart TV? That's what most people do now. It's switching, right?
Yeah,
It
no,
can never compete.
I don't. So we don't have cable. So because we don't have cable, if we
Ah,
watch it on our television, then we watch it through Apple TV. But
got it.
we probably watch like a good 70% of the TV we watch on an iPad Pro or on our phones.
Well, don't tell me you don't have cable. I do work for NBC, so
I don't. I
please
haven't had
describe.
cable since I've never paid for cable. Yeah.
I'm sad by that. So yeah.
So, was there anything else in the Apple video strategy that you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, I think when it comes down to it, Apple's biggest competitor, yes, they're targeting Amazon, but their biggest competitor is technically YouTube. And not the user-generated side. I'm talking about YouTube. YouTube right now is like the king of everything when it comes down to anything content, right? People don't really understand that. That's why I'm just baffled by Spotify. They still don't understand that that's their main competitor. It baffles me. And when everyone talks about music, they keep talking about Apple Music and then there's Spotify. They always forget the biggest one that literally everyone uses. If you go to college campuses, if you look at little teenagers, they don't use Spotify. They literally use YouTube. YouTube's for everything. The same applies for TV as well, by the way. And YouTube, if you really think about it, they also offer TV subscription service too. And they also offer add-ons as well. So yes, TV channels or Amazon channels is the model, but their main competitor will still always be YouTube because YouTube is everywhere. Amazon is a US thing. If you go outside the United States, yes, people heard of it because it's like the flagship and everyone knows about America. But do people use Amazon? No, because it's not applicable to them. YouTube is applicable to everyone, and they're everywhere.
So, in can you like subscribe to HBO on YouTube?
Yes,
Oh, I didn't know that.
but no one does that. I want to make that clear. This is where Apple has a leg up because when it comes down to YouTube's main focus, were never serious and they're never going to be serious about subscriptions. Their main focus is always free because that's their main bread and butter, right? It's advertising. They don't want people to pay. They want people just to spend more time watching on YouTube or Google's platforms so they can sell advertising, right? That's their main focus. Yes, you can technically buy YouTube TV through YouTube, but no one does it. Yes, you can technically listen to YouTube music, and that's their main competitor to Spotify. Oh my gosh, Spotify needs to be worried. But is it going to go anywhere? No, because they know and they don't care when it comes down to it. They just want you to use YouTube,
Right.
and Apple needs to find a way to compete against that. And I would argue they do by focusing on quality, right? So their content they're going to be producing, it's not going to be user generated quality level. It's going to be much better. It's $2 billion a year. It's going to be really premium content, broadcast level that's applicable to everyone, that everyone can watch and everyone can watch with their family without feeling uncomfortable. That, that's the kind of content Apple's going to be focusing on. But at the same time, they know that most people, when it comes down to video, they just use YouTube and or Netflix, of course. So Apple would come in between, and Apple, what they really want to focus on it, what they really want to insert themselves is, I guess, the lower level, even before YouTube and before Netflix. So you just buy Netflix on top of their service.
Yeah. So we still have two left to go, Apple News and Apple Podcasts, and we have like maybe 20 minutes left that because I have to head out in 20 minutes. So maybe move on to Apple News. Where do you see Apple News going? I mean, you've already said that you see it being like of the future of Apple Video and podcasts and all of that. But for the news itself, do you see that the rumors being true that they will add in like a paid subscription that maybe allows you to basically bundle up the different things that you can currently buy within Apple News right now?
Yes, but that's mostly right now is focusing on magazines and not focus on like news publishers itself. I think it's going to be very hard for Apple to get any like news publishers like the New York Times and so on to get bundled into that service, and that's okay, right? It's going to be focused on like trade publications and magazines itself. So, I call it other people's money, if you will. So if you have a job and you want to subscribe to something, you're not going to be using your money. You're going to be using the company's money. That's what they're going to be focusing on, and that's fine. That's great. It's going to be trade publications. It's going to be magazines itself. If you do want to subscribe to the New York Times, if you do want to subscribe to the Washington Post itself, you can already do that through Apple News right now, and it's just separate. And you just buy individually for that one individual publisher. That's the way Apple Video is going to work, and that's the way Apple News itself. So what I mean by Apple News itself, where I see them going forward, I see they're already executing very, very, very well. They are by far the number one app when it comes down to news in the world, and a lot of people think that is power defaults. I would argue no. If you remember Newsstand, Well, News10 failed, right? And it was default. It was built into every single iPhone. Yeah, no one used it, right?
Right.
Or the Apple Clips app. If everyone remembers the Clips app, it's a great app. No one used it, right? Apple News itself, at the beginning when it first launched, no one used it. It wasn't really the best service, but as they kept improving it, and two things happened. They kept improving the experience of the app itself, and then Facebook happened, where it was just inundated with a lot of trash, clickbait, and fake news itself. That's where Apple had an opening, and that's where you saw Apple News just really tick up. And they are doing very, very, very well. The way I view Apple News, though, is I view Apple News as a platform. I don't really view it as a front end app itself. The front end app is just what they're going to do, and what they're really going to focus on is, of course, expand the distribution. Right now, they're only in 3 countries: the United States, the United Kingdom, and Australia. They need to expand that into a lot more countries, and so most of the countries itself. That's the future of Apple News, of course. The back end, that's where it's really interesting, because that's going to start taking on other roles like video and so on. Um, for the Apple News front end, the actual service itself, yes, they're going to be integrating texture and through their trade publications, their bundle service.
Yeah, and if
But
anybody doesn't know, Texture is the company that they bought that had a bundle where basically you could pay Texture X amount a month and you would get like Time magazine and all the different trade magazines and all
Condé
that stuff.
Nast magazines, exactly, exactly. It's a magazine. It's not a newspaper, exactly. Um, they're going to expand that to trade publications, of course, too, like engineering and so on, or business stuff. That's where they're going to be focused on. That's going to be great. On top of that, I would argue that Apple should consider going into the streaming side for news as well. I see a big opening for Apple in this one area. Right now, there isn't a 24-hour live news service that's native to digital, right? There isn't such thing as that. Think of CNN, but think of it for the mobile world, if you will. I would argue this is where Apple what Apple should do. If anyone uses Apple Music, they have something called Beats One, the radio station, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they have 12 hours of programming every single day, and they produce content all across the world, and they have shows in between, and it's like a linear network, but for audio. I would argue that's what they should do with Apple News itself. But instead of only having audio, it could be video as well. So it'll be a live 24-hour stream of content. And instead of Apple producing the TV shows, they could work with CBS, they could work with NBC, Fox, and CNBC, Bloomberg, and so on, where they would insert, an hour show into this live stream, right? So every hour there's going to be a brand new different break. There's going to be a brand new different kind of content. So at 6 o'clock you can watch the nightly news. At 7 o'clock you can watch like Bloomberg West, or it used to be Bloomberg Technology, I think, and so on. So I think they have a huge opening around there, and I would argue that should be free as well. And the reason why I argue Apple should be doing that is because when it comes down to it, Apple News is great to read long, in-depth articles. In fact, that's what they're really focusing on. That's where they really excel at. Or like think of it like a Snapchat Discover for news itself. Like that's actually where I'm seeing a lot of the data comes from. Like that's where people who use Snapchat Discover for news are the same people that go to Apple News itself, just because there's so much trust and there's so much high expectation of quality that's why you use it. But when it comes down to like breaking news, right? It's still Twitter. That's where you get breaking news. I would argue Apple has an opening in the breaking news area, and to do that, they need to have like a live linear channel itself, and
So
that's how you go into it.
and so that would be you're scrolling through your timeline and you're not timeline. You're scrolling through Apple News and
Right.
there's live breaking. I know they already do this. Like they'll say like an event is happening and there'll be that
Yes. You
the
tap
thing
on
at the
it,
top.
and
Yeah.
before anyone can write an article, yeah, exactly. Before anyone can write an article about it, it says, "Hey, there's live breaking news." You tap on it, and it opens up the video stream.
Huh. Yeah, and then from a backend perspective, if they already have that built for Apple Video and some of the other stuff they have in Apple News already, then they can just reuse that work.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know this, but Apple News is a platform. They actually support live updating of content. So if you publish an article, just like a live blog, Apple News, the format, can auto update live. A lot of people don't know that. Number two, Apple News supports live streams. So they did the live stream of like the Comey testimony in Congress, or the most recent Met Gala with one of our partners, with one of our brands at NBCE Entertainment. So they actually live streamed the entire event right from Apple News. Apple News supports live streaming. So it's just taken to the next level.
Hmm. Yeah, it's really cool. So just because of time, we need to transition into the last one, and we have touched on this a couple times already. But Apple Podcasts, what are some ways that you see them improving Apple Podcasts, and do you see them actually investing significantly here, or is this going to be kind of like it has been for a while, where they do some updates every once in a while, but it kind of just stays pretty much the same?
Yeah, so this is where I'm a little more iffy about because it doesn't make Apple any money. It really doesn't, and there really isn't that much Apple could do, if you will, like separate or additional. I would argue if they do want to do something, they already have the back end right now. They already have everything already built, and I would argue what they should do is, and wouldn't require that much work at all because they already have it, is just make Apple Podcasts a lot more like Apple News. So right now, when you subscribe to a feed or subscribe to a podcast itself, you subscribe to it, and you can see, you go to its individual channel, you can see the list of podcast episodes, but they don't really have a feed, right? It doesn't have an algorithm. It can't recommend you content. They can at the bottom, but just like two or three or four other podcasts. Hey, this is what other people listen to, but they don't really have an algorithm. They don't really have like a feed itself. I would argue it needs that. It needs discoverability. It needs to bring people who already listen to podcasts and show them more other kinds of content that you may be also interested in. That's what Apple should both focus on. That's what Apple needs to really double down on, the algorithm itself, because right now it's more like living in a silo. You listen to a podcast yourself, you subscribe to, and that's it. You have no idea, it has no idea what you listen to, and it has no idea what to recommend, and doesn't recommend it you anything. I, I would argue it should, and they don't need to do that much work. It's already built. They already built it. It's called Apple News. They need to make They need to make their podcast app a lot more like Apple News, built in the subscription, built in an algorithm, built into that, offer subscriptions just like they do for Apple News. Same back end. You can use the same format, right? The Apple News format, and on top of that, you would get better analytics, right? Because right now, I think most people complain about there isn't that good of analytics that comes from podcasts, right? Yes, Apple offered it through the podcast analytics, but it's not that accurate. Actually, you have to opt in, and it's not very good. The amount of in-depth analytics it provides is pretty poor. Um, Apple News already has a great analytics portal. It's really great. It's really good. What they need to do is just apply that to podcasts, and you would get all those benefits for a very little amount of work because it's already built.
Hmm.
And I would argue that's the future for podcast if they want to do that.
Yeah. So I mean, basically, the big four content plays that you see is Apple Music, Apple Video, Apple News, and Apple Podcast. And based on everything you've said, it seems like you're pretty bullish for how they're approaching these things. Is there anything that you see them doing poorly here?
Well, I would argue opportunities areas for Apple. When it comes down to it, Apple still needs to work on the back end, their content delivery system. So everyone was wondering, are they going to compete against Netflix, and are they going to offer this, and how are they going to distribute it? Which app are they going to would they distribute their content to? I would argue no one asked the question, how are they going to deliver this content, right? If anyone is familiar with their Apple services, it's not very reliable, right? They have a lot of issues regarding quality, network stream, and so on. And then to throw on video, it's going to be a big challenge for them. So where Apple should be focusing on, and where I would recommend Apple should do, kind of like at the time when Apple bought Beats, like I think 4 years ago, I argued at that time they should not be buying Beats. They should be buying a company called MLB at Bat, and they offer the backend streaming for ESPN, HBO, and so on. And we all know what happens to MLB at Bat. Disney ended up buying. Great acquisition. Apple still needs to buy someone like that. That's what they need to focus on next. They need to buy a video streaming company who can do the encoding live at the back end. They really need to focus on that, because if they do want to deliver video, especially west of the world, internationally, where they don't have the best connections, they need to offer decent amount of quality. They need to be able to live, change the quality of the video stream itself, kind of like YouTube does. We have very little buffering. Number two, I would argue around monetization, like around, especially around Apple Music itself, I would argue Apple needs to buy a company like Spotify, right? They need to really focus on around monetization. They've already said straight up they're not going to focus on ads. Ads is not their business. Fine. But at the same end, artists still need to make money, right? And video producers still need to make money. If they don't want to do ads, then maybe offer like shopping, right? If you want to buy like merchandise, like for your favorite band, Apple needs to offer a way to do that, kind of like Patreon, if you will.
Did you mean Shopify, not Spotify?
Shopify, correct? Sorry,
Shopify. Okay.
Shopify. By the way, I would. It would be great if Apple bought Shopify. I would argue they should, but if they don't want to buy Shopify, if they want to build it by themselves, build it on their own, fine. But when it comes down to it, they still need to focus on monetization, right? I think the biggest problem when the App Store was, and I think Ben Thompson mentioned this very succinctly before, they never really focused on the business model. They just made this. They just made this App Store, and they completely ignored the business needs of developers. But if you don't have a business model, then you'll fail. And if all these developers and if all these content producers fail itself, then you basically you foreclose your entire market itself. And it becomes a really dangerous situation. I would argue Apple can't do that, cannot repeat the same mistake that they did before. They have to really focusing and double down on the way for people to make a business off it, the way for people to make a living off of their platforms. Apple Music itself, I mean, it will be a fantastic idea if you really follow a band itself, and you can use Apple Connect. You can follow a certain music band itself, and you can get updates from them. But why can't you buy merchandise through that? Why doesn't Apple allow it? It doesn't make any sense when Apple has an app store, and Apple understands, succinctly just the importance of branding and the importance of hardware-related items. Like you could buy like what is it like artist-specific Beats headphones. Same idea, right? They do a deal with maybe like Snoop Dogg or someone, and Dr. Dre and someone, or whatever, and you can buy individual like themed Beats headphones for that one artist. The same idea. I think Apple should really expand on that.
Yeah.
That's where they should be focused on. That's their opening.
That's cool. So last question of the show. What is one thing that you find unusual in tech right now?
I think what I find really unusual is that technology does not want to take responsibility. That Silicon Valley itself, they just don't want to take any responsibility whatsoever. I feel like they really love like superhero stories and comic books and so on. And the famous saying is, with great power comes great responsibility. Well, technology has all the power in the world right now, but they've not taken up to bat. They never stepped up to the plate at all when it comes down to responsibility. They've always deflected it. Oh no, we're a platform company. We don't want to do that. We don't want to have any kind of moderation control whatsoever. Meanwhile, there's Nazis on their platform going after people and really creating a toxic environment on their platform, and yet the companies say no. So I would argue that it's a double-edged sword right now. If they don't want to take any responsibility, what's going to happen is their platform is going to become so toxic that what's going to happen is it's going to discourage people from using it more, and it's going to happen. They're going to have to accept it one day that they have ownership of their platform. It is their platform. Anyone that does something on their platform and uses their platform as a megaphone, right? They're tacitly endorsing and saying and giving that bad actor their megaphone, right?
Yeah.
They are giving them. That is speech itself. When they allow that to happen, you are giving someone else your speech, your endorsement. You are thereby making a choice not to do something. That is a choice. Not to do anything is a choice.
Yeah. And do you see Apple, like, it seems like Apple's trying to keep away from that as much as possible. Do you see them stepping up to the plate when they need to?
No, they have.
Yeah.
Right, they have. So let's make it clear that Apple is the only company, other than Snapchat, there are two companies when it comes down to it, that actually stepped up to the plate and says, you know what? No, we take full responsibility of our own platform, because they know at heart it's the branding, right? If you have Nazis running around your platform and making a toxic environment, it lowers your branding. It hurts. It reflects poorly on your brand. Apple can't have that, right? And so what they do is they actually hire editors, and they've taken a stand already and said, no, on our Apple News platform itself, we will not allow propaganda, we will not allow that kind of really race to the bottom crap content on our platform. They actively moderate, they actively remove bad articles. They do that right now. They have editorial control. Apple and Snapchat are the only two companies at scale that have said yes.
Hmm.
And they have been doing it, and that's the way I view them. That's the way they're going to approach a video itself. So are they going to have a YouTube competitor? No, because they can't go into the user-generated content and deal with all that crap, right? They don't want to go into that. But for the content itself on the news or the content that they're going to provide on their video service itself, it's going to be broadcast level. They're going to make sure their content that's available is going to be age appropriate for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So where can people find you on the internet, Eric?
You can find me on Twitter. I think my handle is ericyoung_1.
Yep. You guys can find me on Twitter at TimothyBuckSF, and you can find Unco on Twitter at _UncoFM. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Eric.
No problem. Thanks for having me.